Had a couple of days at the Jobs and Skills Summit. Of course, the big political headlines were all about industrial relations changes and what will potentially happen in this area. Joining me live is Assistant Health and Aged Care Minister Ged Kearney for more on this and a little bit in her portfolio as well. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Tom.
The boot or the better off overall test, this seems very likely for change. Is it fair to say that there were mistakes even bringing this in? It's just so restrictive that even when unions and business agree on something, it gets knocked out by the Fair Work Commission.
Look, I think the concept of better off overall is a very important one when it comes to bargaining, particularly for people in low-paid industries. You know, we definitely don't want a situation where people are paid in pizzas or free meals or something other than a monetary remuneration. So to say that workers have to be better off overall, I think is a really good premise from which to start when you're negotiating industrial agreements. The extent to which it is complicated and hard to work with, well, that's another question. And I think Tony Burke has agreed, and has the unions and employers, that there's some way that we can make it a little more flexible and a bit more workable. But I think the premise of better off overall is important.
So I guess that's the question, though. It's how far it goes. So it applies at the moment even to hypothetical workers who could be there in the future. If you've got a workforce of 100,000 and 5 are not worse off, but just the same, no better off, you can have an agreement struck out. I mean, that just seems like a really damaging inflexibility.
Well, I think what's come out of the Jobs and Skills Summit is that there is going to be a lot more consultation on this. This is an area that everyone agrees we can talk about and look at, but certainly we don't want to do what the previous government did and just scrap it all together, because I still do think that the basic premise that workers need to be better off is important.
Okay, so how would you describe what was wrong exactly what the coalition was proposing last time?
Well, this is a different proposal. We are going to go out to negotiation this time. We're going to sit down with unions for a start and make sure that unions understand what's going on. As workers' representatives, that's important. I think it's interesting that small business have entered this foray and said that, you know, this is an area where they'd be interested in looking at, particularly the broader negotiations around industrial relations changes. You know, we want to get this right, so there will be negotiations around this.
Okay, so small business you mentioned there, they got involved in the so-called multi-employer bargaining.
Yes, that's right.
Will that be opt-in? Should it be opt-in?
Look, that's a very good question, and this seems to be what everybody is focusing on. I think really what we need to focus on is the fact that small businesses are saying to us that the industrial relations system is complex for them. They don't have large HR departments. They find it very difficult to dive into the Fair Work Act and make sure they're doing the right thing. I think when it comes to bargaining, they're saying to us that this is a good way for us to be able to do this efficiently in a way that makes sure that we can do it and workers can get a pay rise.
So COSBO has said that. It's the Council of Small Business of Australia. The Australian Chamber of Commerce, another small business body, isn't such a big fan. It's not, you know, it's not all of small business saying this. It's not homogenous. So a lot of them want to know about it being opt-in. So if you're a hairdressing business and there's a deal going on, you don't have to be involved in that negotiation, whatever happens. Isn't that pretty important to indicate what the government's looking at here?
Well, the Prime Minister made it quite clear this morning that there's more to be done on this. There's more negotiation that will be taking part, full consultation on how we actually move ahead with this. But I think we don't want to lose sight of the fact that low-paid workers need a pay rise, that it's very difficult, that the current bargaining system isn't working. Tom, there has to be a change. There's got to be a circuit breaker somewhere. And this seems to be a very sensible way that we can actually try to make that change. We have to make sure workers get a pay rise. We have to make sure it's not too complicated for employers, particularly small business people.
So how should Labor decide whether this is opt-in or not?
As I said, I don't think we really need to focus on this. I think there's going to be consultation.
But this is a big factor, and small business
It is a big factor, I agree, and they will be asked about that. I think as we go forward, it's been very clear that there's been no decision made about that. So, yeah, sure, we will talk about this.
So if there's a clear voice emerging within small business that this has to be opt-in or they wouldn't like it, you would listen to that?
Of course, we'd listen to everybody. We'd make sure that this works for everybody. And I think that's the beautiful thing of the Jobs Summit is that we all actually sat down at the table, all stakeholders were there, and there was a general consensus that workers need a pay rise. And I think we need to start from that premise that the current system isn't working. So let's look at the system. We've identified the boot, we've identified multi-employer bargaining as two ways that we can make a difference. Tony Burke has focused on other things, you know, the extent to which the workforce is casualised, the gig economy, employers threatening to trash enterprise bargain agreements and throw people onto the award as a threat when they're trying to negotiate, which isn't really bargaining in good faith. So there's a whole raft of areas, not just this one that we're looking at, and I think we need to recognise that there's a system that needs to be fixed because it's not really working for employees in particular at the moment.
So on that opt-in, though, just to be clear on this, if you're getting clear feedback from enough of the small business sector, and I guess it's somewhat hard to quantify, but if it's being made clear to you that's their concern, because you could at least start off with opt-in. If you say that doesn't work, then we'll make it compulsory. That seems like a much less drastic path to take.
I'd love to make an announcement on your program today,
You're
Tom.
free to.
I think that as the Prime Minister made it very clear, and Tony Burke has made it very clear, there's still a lot of discussion to be had
And is that
around
the
this
same
issue.
for whether a right to strike would be expanded, that one group of workers could strike on behalf of another?
It's interesting that whenever we talk about industrial relations changes, those amongst us that wish to scaremonger automatically go to the issue of strike. I mean, striking is actually a very rare thing. The vast majority of bargaining ends in agreements, the vast majority. And I know this from my history in the trade union movement. And, you know, they always bring out this whole fear of strikes as a way to make people frightened of any process or any change. I think we need to focus on the fact that the bargaining system needs change. And let's look at good ways we can do that.
That's a very long way of not actually answering the question, though.
No, it's true. I mean, you know, people always
this
do
is the
go
question.
to...
This is not me. I mean, I've never owned a small business, but this is what I get asked or told in conversations with the small business lobby group, in particular the Chamber of Commerce. This is what businesses are telling them. It might be that it doesn't often end in strike or industrial reaction, but it also is a pretty big change to the laws if this happens.
I think the change is that it will be easier for employers and hopefully will result in pay rises for employees. And that's really what we need to focus on.
So does that mean it's in the same position as opt-in or opt-out? We don't yet know where Labor will land on that.
I think there's still a lot of work to be done on these areas.
Okay.
And I'm confident that everybody is going into this in good faith. And that's really the key, that we want workers to get a pay rise. We want it to be easier for employers to negotiate those pay rises. And we're trying to look at mechanisms. And instead of to do that, and instead of people just sitting on the sidelines throwing hand grenades, hey, let's have a good chat about this and work it out.
You'll never get everyone on board. Is it fair to say you still want a majority on board and not make changes with a hostile reaction? I think
we want to make sure that we've got changes that will work. That's the main thing. And, you know, you're right, not everybody is always going to be on board, but I think we've got to stick to the premise of what everybody in principle agrees. The current system isn't working, particularly for low-paid people and women in female-dominated industries. We need to make some changes, and these things have been identified as areas that we can do that. And just finally on healthcare workers then, within your portfolio, free nursing degrees was the answer in Victoria? Is it needed nationally? Yes. Well, look, we'll see how it works in Victoria, but I think the health workforce really is an area that needs its own focus. 2 days at the Jobs and Skills Summit, a couple of good things came out for the health workforce. Allowing undergraduates to stay longer after their degree, I think will help, certainly, with the crisis. We're going to invest in First Nations healthcare workers, but the Minister is about to embark on 2 months of consultation to go around the country and to say, how are we going to fix the health workforce crisis? So if there's a big boost from Victoria's plan, you'd go, well, let's pick that up nationally. I think we'll have a look at what happens in Victoria, but at the moment we're going around the country negotiating, consulting. We'll consult with Victoria and see how they're going to do that. Ged Kearney, thanks for your time. It's my great pleasure, Tom.